Welcome back to New Talk, the opposite of World Talk, here on Synergy TV. And if you've been watching, if you haven't been watching, if you're now catching in, we're talking about sex education, specifically in secondary schools. And my two guests, Keir and Warren, they said something really interesting, that they received sex ed in a really kind of informal fashion via their parents when they were very, very young, about 5 and 6 years old, respectively. What's interesting to me is, next to Minister of Education, next to the comments from the Minister of Education saying that this should happen at the home, these two people say that it happened to them at the home, and it happened very intelligently, very meaningfully, and it didn't happen without all the kind of bureaucracy that comes with the school education system. Is Anthony Garcia onto something? Should we just focus on empowering parents to have these conversations more and just keep it out of school because you're already learning about 18 subjects by Form 3 anyway?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Let me get a yes first.
Okay. Yes, we should absolutely be empowering parents to talk to their children about this, right? I think whether or not we can get sex education into schools, parents should be empowered to talk to their children about this. Children should be comfortable enough talking to their parents about these topics. Right. You know, I can't imagine ever not speaking to my mother when I was younger about these things. I can't imagine going to a teacher who is practically a stranger to me and talking about these things. So yes, parents need to be empowered. But at the same time, there will always be parents who are not willing to have this conversation. Right. Right? And I think Warren looks like he's ready to pick up that thread.
No, well, what I was thinking is, you know, there will always be parents who say, yeah, okay, the government wants me to teach my child about sex, but what the government doing in my house business, right?
Okay.
Like if it's my responsibility to teach my child about sex, I will teach them what I want to know or what I want them to know, and nothing else.
Yeah, but it comes back to the same concern that we have at the secondary school level, where we have the national schools who are interested in sex education once they can focus the conversation purely on abstinence. How do we deal with that? Because if we take it out of the home, right? We say, well, whether parents have it or not is not the state's business. We have to make sure that children are getting that education. The national schools, for the most part, dictate for themselves how they teach what they teach.
I think the short answer is that you can't just teach abstinence.
Right.
Yes.
Now that's a difficult thing to implement.
Right, it's true. But when I thought about abstinence in preparation for this program, the funniest thing that crossed my mind, and I'm not trying to put anybody up here, right? But I'm just trying to be honest. The last person that I knew from an abstinence club, right, was decidedly not abstinent, right? Okay. And I know this. Now, I'm not going to be person, but let's just say I know that the person is not abstinent. And what does that mean, therefore, if the only option for sex education for a lot of people is the abstinence-only conversation that is not empowering them to compete against their hormones? Because clearly it's not working for everyone.
Well, then you have to consider as well that the people who are in these abstinence clubs sometimes come from very religious backgrounds. And so then they also miss out on the opportunity to learn proper sexual health practices in the first place, which is why sometimes we laugh years later, hey, you know, that girl from the abstinence club not married and she has 6 children. But it's a very serious thing because she never knew how to use a condom. She never got the education on what is proper care, how to respond to men, how to deal with those politics of life.
Right, because I mean that's a critical part of sex education as well. How do we deal with the advances that come with other people's hormones around us? And make decisions that are in line with what we want out of ourselves and our future, which is another thing that I feel like we don't necessarily do with young people. We don't treat young people as though they are in control of their bodies.
Exactly. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that we make. especially when you're a teenager, right? That is a time of self-exploration, and I don't just mean that sexually, but I mean you are learning who you are.
Right.
You're learning who you want to become, you're forming an identity, and you want to make your own decisions. You want to do your own things. And I think that a large part of that, you know how people say, you know, teenagers are rebellious. Like,
Right.
that's not entirely false. And a lot of that is the fight for independence, to feel like they're making their own decisions and that they have some control over their lives. And so if we take that away and we tell a teenager, I guess anywhere between maybe 12 and 20, if we just say, you can't have sex is bad, you can't do it, one of the first things someone's going to think is, I want to assert my independence over this authority that is telling me what I cannot do.
Right.
And you know what? There's porn everywhere telling me that it feels great. So why would
And you know we are one of the largest, I think we're still
Consumers.
Yes, we're one of, I think it's the top 5 largest consumers of pornography.
Yeah, we were first 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And that means a lot, right?
So
How we get sex education as it stands right now
Exactly.
is porn.
And also how we
Exactly.
learn about the opposite sex.
Yeah.
So we really need to acknowledge, I think, that the teens need that kind of independence, and they're going to make these decisions. And I think that not all of them, you know, I don't want to be too general, but many are just going to say, if you tell me I can't do this, this is something I really want to do.
Right.
And so if we take that taboo, if we take that, if we take that rule away, I think that we would actually see some improvement if we can also equip them with ways to make good decisions about it.
Okay. I want to challenge you all. Now, I know, I think it's virtually impossible to get statistics on this, but on Synergy TV's morning show Breaking Dawn, I had a very interesting, something resembling an argument with my 2 co-hosts, Stefan and Abby, about whether or not young people today are obviously more sexually promiscuous than their parents and grandparents. I think the answer is no. I know my grandfather better than anybody else, right? He had a good time while he was alive, right? So the concern that mature folks are having about this younger generation having more sex and having more risky sex, is that necessarily true? Is that valuable to the conversation at all, in fact?
I think it's valuable for people to share their experiences, especially your parents and grandparents. Like if my conversation about sex happened, my conversation about sex and my sex education that came from my family life happened with my mother, but nothing happened with my father.
Right.
And up till now, I don't think my father's uttered the word sex to me in my entire life. So if it is that your parents and grandparents can share their experiences with you in such a way to ensure that you have more enriching, fulfilling life experiences and don't make the same mistakes that they made, then I think we'd all be better for it.
What do you
I
think?
agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree completely.
It's interesting that you say that your father, Warren, probably never uttered the word sex to you. Another very interesting thing, you know, I like to put up my mom's on this show. Hi, Mom. Is when I asked my mother, actually that was just last year, if I had a girlfriend and we were living in this house, would you mind if we had sex in the house? She said, absolutely not. I asked, does it matter whether or not I was paying you rent or not? She's like, no, you can't have sex in this house. It would just be awkward.
Oh, wow.
Right, and it's these kind of paradigms, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's particularly weird, because I think it would be weird having sex with my mother was home too. But this is the paradigm that young people are receiving education in. It's not necessarily just a matter of what they're saying and what they're not saying, but what they're actively prohibiting presence in the home. And it's happening similarly in schools where we have teachers, educators who are not interested in having these conversations. And boards of schools, academic gatekeepers who are deliberately closing the door on these kinds of conversations. How do we as young people change the paradigm about how we speak about not just what sex education is, but the ability to have sex education in schools? What do we need to do to get the door to open back?
Training teachers needs to happen full stop.
Right.
If you have kids that you are uncomfortable talking to about sex, I cannot imagine that you would be comfortable talking to a stranger's child.
Correct.
Exactly.
Well, if you're getting paid, you have to do it.
Right? Yes, but that doesn't mean I'm comfortable about it.
Right. Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not gonna, do the job halfway.
Right.
Which happens a lot. Let's
Right.
be real. You might get paid for just giving them a couple handouts and being like, read that, yo. Like that's, So we need to train people who we intend to have educate our children about sex. We need to train them to handle it, and we need to train them to handle the awkward questions, because let's be honest, they're going to be awkward questions.
Right.
Right.
And I mean, I think that it's a real tragedy, sometimes that we have such conservative schools, or we have students who go through their entire teenage lives or their entire childhoods without ever being able to have a conversation with somebody about sex, with somebody about their sexuality or what they're experiencing internally, externally in the world. How is it that a girl is going to negotiate and it happens every day, some 30-year-old man whistling at her on the street? Who is she going to talk to about that? Who is she going to share her first sexual experience story with? And try to negotiate all the feelings she's having inside. I think that, yes, I agree with Keir completely. Training needs to happen for teachers, but there should always be someone in the school system, at least, that the child could talk to.
Okay, cool. And let's see if we can come up with some solutions when we come back from the break. You're watching New Talk, the opposite of Old Talk, right here on Synergy TV. We'll be back right after this short message.